I'm so pleased to have you all here. If you haven't been here before, welcome to the store. We've been in this location for about 15 months. We were 13 years over by Mills College. So very happy to be downtown, and all that comes with that. We do have a newsletter that we send out almost weekly. We have events coming up. We've got a lot of events coming up. So we have, at the end of the counter, there's a bunch of little flyers and things that tell you some people are coming that you might be interested in. Be happy to have you on our newsletter and all that good stuff. But tonight, we're here for Kim Fowler. I met Kim at the other store in the Laurel District, and she became a wonderful customer, and then bought a house right in the neighborhood. So we are actually neighbors now. She is somebody who is a keen, you all know this, being the launch, you probably know her. She's a keen observer of change and interpersonal dynamics, and it was a natural fit for her to put into words what was going on around her mother's stroke and her illness, her dementia, and eventual passing, and the family dynamics that went with that. It's an intensely intimate book. If you have not read it yet, please do. It offers some beautiful insights into family, illness, and the human face of mortality. But please welcome John Warren, who will be here to introduce Kim.
Hello. I felt very privileged when Kim asked me to introduce her tonight. I think most of you know her, so I'm not going to get in the nitty-gritty of her biography, but I thought I'd just offer a couple of words just to frame some aspects of Kim and her life and her work that I think are particularly relevant to tonight's event and to the book that she's written. In her life, Kim has been an actor, a dancer, singer, grantor, playwright, songwriter, teacher, executive director, artistic director, life coach, facilitator, loyal friend, loving godmother, and a mindful daughter. And I'm sure I've missed some. Tonight she adds to that list the title of book author. In all her endeavors, Kim brings a deep sense of care for all those who surround her. Long before she trained as a life coach, she played that role for family, friends, and colleagues. It has always come naturally for her to ask provoking questions and to offer a supportive hand. She's helped countless people wend their way through difficult decisions, interpersonal issues, and tragic events, and to find their way to purpose and joy. In caring for her mother after her stroke, Kim had to bring these skills to her own situation. And indeed, she held her mother's hand through difficult, confusing times and found her way to purpose and joy. And now we are all fortunate that she's put her pen to that experience. With All Will Be Well, Kim has done something extraordinary. She's captured that spirit of generosity and insight that she brings to all her endeavors. Reading this book, one gets to experience equal measures of grief and celebration as it navigates through the difficult shoals of caregiving. If you've ever struggled to forgive, to sacrifice, or to love, I believe you'll find some wisdom in her writing. And so without further ado, let me invite Kim Fowler to say a few words and read some passages from her wonderful new book.
You're going to write all my web copy from now on.
Yeah. I can't.
Hi! Oh my God. Hi! There are more seats in the back and all, so. It's so wonderful to have all of you people from so many different parts of my life, all important. Some from practically when I moved here, like Bob, who I was in my first show here really with, Tokens. Just people from my choir and from my work life and from friends and just... I'm a little overwhelmed with it. So thank you. I mean, if I could say something about each of you, I would, about how you are a part of why I'm here. So, and I really want to thank Luann, because when she had the bookstore on MacArthur, a colleague of mine, Sue Schleifer, we started doing workshops called Writing Down Dementia, which Anne and Bernice, who are here, and Linda, are all part of. So she really had a lot to do with helping me get really started around this. And so when I asked her, can I do the book launch at your place? And she said, sure. It just seemed perfect. It was like, home. So I'm just going to read a couple of things here. I'm going to skip around a little bit. But I thought I would start with the prologue. And can you hear me in the back? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool and groovy. Okay. Hi, Carrie. So just to set the tone. Prologue. Loss is an unpredictable thing. Sudden loss is different from a fast fade. Sudden loss is savage. It grabs you by the heart and tears at you like a hungry buzzard. It eats at you until there is nothing left but bone, and then releases you into a tumult of grief. There you nearly drown in depths you never imagined you could survive, but you do. You are pulled ashore by memory, which creates a way for you to walk back to the beginning and create a new territory of life without your loved one as you knew them. Here the colors are different. The light is muted or sharper. Here the flora and fauna of love and simple relationship take new form. Here the mundane is magical and the unimaginable is routine. It's here where you discover that all will be well, a truth that my mother held even in the darkest of hours. It was the first thing she said when I fell while ice skating in 8th grade and had to be on crutches for 2 months while my ligaments healed. It was what she said when I realized I had to take a leave from school because I was failing my classes. It was what she told me when one and then another of my closest friends were diagnosed HIV positive and told they could die. It was what I tried to remember in the pre-dawn hours of November 15th, 1999, when my father called me to tell me she had suffered a stroke and was in surgery. It was at the core of the next 12 years of my life with her slowly devolving body. All will be well was fundamental to being willing to be surprised by the new relationship that emerged with my father when our family roles were reversed. Dad no longer had a wife. Rather, he had gained an aging child to care for. I exchanged my role as child of both my parents for one as a co-caregiver and parent with my father. Power dynamics were topsy-turvy. Dad had to learn to make decisions about Mom's care with me and I with him. Many times old perceptions and wounds blocked the evolution of our partnership. When we could forgive or move them aside, we redefined respect and love for one another. I know now that I believe in the resilience of families and the reconstruction of life that is possible in the face of catastrophic loss. Even though my mother's body did not die from the stroke, a huge piece of her was suddenly erased, like footprints rubbed from the shore by a quick tide. And yet, an essential piece remained. Her joy, her love of natural beauty, and her delight in music stayed with her until the end. They were less robust, but never lost their depth. When I sat with her on Sunday afternoons in the Lake Merritt Botanical Gardens and asked if she liked being near the waterfall and the ducks and the cedar trees, she often replied with an emphatic, That told me that despite losing her words and physical movement, the mom I loved was still there. I hope this book serves as a companion as you travel your own road of loss, of redefining relationships, of redefining yourself in the midst of disruption or tragedy. I hope it offers the possibility of surprise, resourcefulness, and deep delight in the newness that emerges through plummeting into the abyss of that loss and journeying back with your eyes focused on the stars. So the first chapter is all about that phone call from Dad and what happened after that, which basically meant I was in the middle of a show that this guy over here was directing, that he had kind of talked me into, and it's called Greensboro, and I called him from from home in Chicago. I said, John, I'm not going to make the show tomorrow night. And he moved heaven and earth, and the cast did, to replace me for a night. So So I got there, and I'm going to start with what happened when I walked into the hospital room where Mom was. Each room in the surgical ICU had an internal wall of solid glass so you could get a quick glance of your patient's status from afar. The floor was quiet except for the hum of equipment and the syncopated beeping of apparatuses that calibrated a patient's rate of recovery or decline. Moving colored graphs with flashing numbers spoke for bedridden bodies. The angle and pace of a line, the rising and lowering of numeric values signaled when a family member could breathe or panic. It was both a maddening and comforting permission to be in the company of these life-measuring machines. Suddenly, I heard a patient erupt, "Get the fuck away from me!" I froze. I thought the patients were too drugged up for such outbursts, and I wondered who was so out of control, unwilling to admit that the voice, if not the words, sounded an awful lot like my mother. And so it was.
Wow.
Or at least someone they said was my mother. She in no way resembled the woman I'd grown up with. Bandages strained to contain her head, which was the size of a cassava melon. The swelling spread her features out in ways that made her look like a fleshy Botero rendering of herself. Sea green IV tubing curled out of her like the tentacles of a mythic monster. She was tied down and struggling like a demon, yelling for someone to get me the hell out of here. I had never before heard my mother utter anything stronger than, "Oh, for John's sake." An epithet I never understood, yet I knew conveyed irritation. She had a wrestling hold on the hand of the nurse who was trying to calm her down. "She's awfully strong with that left hand," the nurse smiled through a wince. Dad stood to her right, scruffy as always, in stained slacks and his favorite overworn sweater of muted red and blue plaid. He was silent, not attempting to run the show, not asking excruciatingly detailed questions or making demands. I stared at his sweater for a long moment to avoid being pulled into the helplessness of his face, something I hadn't seen since I had tried to comfort him many years ago when my folks separated. Like then, there was not a glimmer of normality in our family scene. The only way to soothe the terror that rose in my throat was to focus intensely on one point: Mom. "Your mother had a hemorrhagic stroke," the nurse said, still trying to wrest herself from Mom's grip. A frenzied feral bleed had drowned a vast collection of Mom's front temporal brain cells, the ones responsible for organizing sensory input and regulating emotional response. How long would its effects last? Could she survive it? Every outburst led to a spike in her blood pressure that alarmed the nurse and therefore alarmed me. Then I really took in my father. He stood to Mom's left near the head of the bed. He was not close enough to touch her easily, just close enough to be someone who mattered, who should be there. He was stone silent, his face fallen in fatigue. The usual flash of his brown eyes was dulled to a matte finish, yet he held Mom dutifully in his sights. Or perhaps he did not know where else to look. His posture, which had curved with age, held all the emotion of the past 24 hours in a weighted sag. He was in a situation so completely outside his skill set, and he had no clue how to communicate with this new wife he saw before him. In that moment, I knew my role. I was to collude with a medical system that was counter to every belief my mother held and that I trusted blindly because I didn't know where else to turn in the face of such catastrophic illness. Communicating with Mom on her spiritual terms lay far beyond any rudimentary knowledge I retained from Sunday school. I watched her nurse study the monitor while remaining in Mom's grip. She turned to look at Dad and me and said matter-of-factly, if not calmly, "If her numbers go over 185, she's getting into a danger zone that could cause another stroke." At that moment, I silently addressed the demon that had Mom in its clutches and ordered it aside so I could talk to the woman I had known as my mother for nearly 50 years. I pried her defiant fingers loose from the nurse's compassionate hand and took them into my own. Hi, Mom, it's me. I know this is completely unfamiliar and really scary, and I also know you're going to be all right. She looked at me like I was speaking in tongues. I want to get out of here, she screamed, squeezing my hand hard on the word out for emphasis. I didn't let go. I know you want to get out of here. Dad and I want you to get out of here. Probably this whole floor wants you to get out of here. But for that to happen, you have got to calm down. You have always told me my entire life that all will be well. You ended every letter, every phone call with those words. Even when I didn't believe they were true, I couldn't ignore them. Then I realized that somewhere I did believe they were true. Her hand loosened ever so slightly, but her eyes never left my face, my lips. You've got to believe they're true now, even if it doesn't feel like it ever will be. Her breath started to slow. She relaxed back onto the bed, still holding on. Dad and I are both here. We're not going to let you go. Let yourself rest. The nurse went to the other side of the bed and injected something into Mom's IV. Since she's calmed down some, this should help her sleep, she said. And then she left us alone. I kept talking and holding on to Mom's hand. She listened. Somehow she reached for her lifelong relationship with me. We held on to one another for dear life. I couldn't afford to break down, and she couldn't afford to heat up. After a while, the multi-purpose medical cocktail knocked her out. Dad needed to go home, and so did I. Well, I don't want to, So, I had several things, but I'll just read. So I'll just read this. Everybody, a little bit more. That's cool. Okay. All right. So this is when I got to her house. This starts to talk about what I saw, which was not the normal state of her house. I kicked off my shoes and stepped down into the wool carpet. I was going into the living room and landed right on my ass. I had tripped on something placed against the bottom step. Something that shouldn't have been there. A pair of taupe naturalizer flats, Mom had a dozen of them in various colors, lay against the bottom step, one shoe in front of the other. Okay, what's that about, I thought, as I willed my tired, not-so-supple bones upright and headed toward the kitchen to get something to eat. Passing through the dining room, I spied another pair of naturalizers underneath the glass Parsons table. There, the navy shoes were positioned heel to toe atop a square of newspaper. One such occurrence was odd. Two felt disturbingly deliberate. Through the open door to the breakfast room, my mother's address book, its spine long broken from constant use, lay amidst piles of Christian Science journals that fanned across the Formica countertop. Built in below were three wide, fading yellow metal drawers that had a propensity for sticking. Against the bottom drawer was a pair of black naturalizers. I let out a breath, unaware that I had been holding it. I began to anticipate the pattern. Sure enough, at the base of the kitchen sink sat a brown pair of her shoes. An anxious laugh rose up through the fear I was not yet willing to acknowledge in my chest. Who knew my mother had a latent, wacky sense of humor? I opened the refrigerator in hopes of finding something of substance to eat, which I hoped might also calm me. The large white Frigidaire was mostly empty, but the Del Monte gherkins, the French's mustard, and the Kraft Thousand Island salad dressing were placed in the middle shelf with all the other condiments in alphabetical order. My heart pounding in my ears, I raced through the rest of the house. There were shoes on a page from the Sunday comics next to her black metal desk in the den, shoes just outside the door to the back porch, at the top and bottom of the basement stairs, two pairs lined up in the hallway to her bedroom. And then there was the bedroom itself. Part of this book is because I wanted people to get a sense of my family and of Mom and Dad. So there's some chapters in here that are about that. It's about Dad's upbringing, both of their upbringing, and then a little bit about each of them, just some memories that kind of give a taste of who they are. So I'm going to just read this one about Dad, and then I'll read one other piece after that. So there was stubborn stock that simmered in Dad, who was extremely independent from a young age. It could get him into trouble or lead him into adventure, or both. Mostly it was the lens through which he interpreted the world. Often the world that is the United States of America did not see things as he did. Dad loved to draw. When he was a teenager, he answered one of those ads that used to appear on the back of matchbook covers. Some of you are old enough to remember that, like me. If you can draw this face, you might be eligible for art school. Send us your drawing today. Dad did. And he got a phone call in return. He had piqued someone's interest at the school. During the course of the conversation, the person he spoke to figured out Dad was black, and the tone of the conversation changed. Negroes need not apply, the voice said, and hung up. When he was in the Army, Dad was stationed at Fort Huachuca, Arizona, where soldiers were trained prior to being assigned for duty in Europe. He had some knowledge of French from high school, so he and 2 other black soldiers were sent to Hampton University in Virginia to train in a language and intelligence program, after which they were to be sent to France. Dad was ecstatic. In addition to be a Negro chosen for the challenge of doing intelligence work, he would have the opportunity to speak a beautiful language that made him feel a part of the scholarly elite. Shortly after he and his buddies began the program, some higher-ups discovered these 3 bright young soldiers were black. Again, he was told, Negroes need not apply. The 3 of them were sent to Fort Benning, Georgia, where he became a sergeant and worked for the Army Corps of Engineers. He was safe from gunfire and bombs, but he had not been chosen for a special duty that would have set him apart from any of his friends at home and from most of the other servicemen in the war. So I think I will just read one other place. So Mom was in the hospital for, I'm not remembering exactly how long, but then she was put into rehab at a place called RIC, Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, which is part of Northwestern. And she was there for 6 weeks. So while she was there, she would have episodes of it's called sundowning, and that, people are nodding their heads, yeah, and that's where the dementia can get really pronounced. And she would just, even not, at times other than that, would just become really agitated. It would be really hard to get her to get to sleep. And I really wanted her to rest so she could do her rehab. So just this one little piece about calming her down. They tried a number of drugs to alleviate her physical and emotional states, all authorized on the basis of my reports on her behavior, since she was unable to tell us directly. Between the verbal apraxia, inability to speak what you intend, which made it difficult for her to actually form certain words, and the aphasia, inability to speak, read, and or write, which destroyed her comprehension, communication was a zero-sum game. I had to guess what might soothe her when her brain and body were raging, anxious, sleepless, or inconsolable. My experimentation yielded 2 methods that I employed for the rest of her life. The first was reading from a book I found on her nightstand, The Best Love Poems of the American People. It had been published in 1936, and written in pen on the inside cover was Yvonne Fowler, 1991. Favorite poems in the table of contents were highlighted with red pencil check marks. Next to one poem, she had written in capital letters, read to me by my mother. I started with that one. There's a quaint little place they call Lullaby Town. It's just back of those hills where the sunsets go down. Its streets are of silver, its buildings of gold, and its palaces dazzling things to behold. And I watch Mom's eyes soften and her breathing slow and her attention hang onto the familiar words. The other activity was singing. We sang children's nursery rhymes like Frere Jacques. We sang Broadway tunes. We sang songs you'd sing around a campfire like Oh Susanna and She'll Be Coming Around the Mountain. Mom loved music. I made sure her room was filled with her favorite CDs, which sometimes caught her attention and sometimes didn't. Singing, on the other hand, always engaged her and seemed to raise her endorphin level. And one of her favorites was, take me out to the ball game, take me out to the crowd, buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I never come back, 'cause it's root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame, but it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. She really liked to say that, 3 strikes and you're out. Was her favorite place. So the rest of the book is about what happens after she came home and all the negotiating that Dad and I had to do around things, and also leading up to Dad's death. And then after Dad died, I moved her out here and moved her to Lakeside Park near the lake. And it's about our time there and up to her death. So thank you for listening. Thank you for And now I am going to be interviewed by Mary Reynolds Thompson, who is my writing coach and who has been, that started, it's her fault. She did a workshop called Write the Damn Book. And I went. I wasn't even really sure I was writing a book, but I thought, I'm going to go to this workshop. And I started writing the book.
You did indeed.
Yeah.
You did indeed.
Yeah. So,
Shall
we're
we?
going to sit over here. Does it matter where I sit? Sit here. Oh, okay, I'll sit here. Okay.
Hi, everybody.
Oh, we have real water glasses.
So yes, Kim has been in a writing group that I've been facilitating for over 7 years now, right? And with Jeff Jacobson, Lauren Powers, and Kat Williford. So we're going to bring them in here to our circle, because really every week, you know, for a long period of time, we've shared and we've supported each other. And my God, I am so proud of you. And yay! And, you know, writing a memoir is a really big deal. So many things that come into it. And as a group, as we're called the Kimchis, our writing group, notice Kim is right there in the front, the Kimchis. And we came up with a series of questions that we thought people might be really interested in hearing the answers to. So the very first question is, why did you do, I mean, we just heard how many different hats you wear. You're an extraordinary woman with many different talents. Why did this story need to be a book? What was it about this story that really needed to become this memoir?
I don't think I knew initially. I just knew I had to write. And part of it was that the process of writing was also my process of working through what was happening. And when I went to that workshop, and Mary had us actually, we had created the covers for the book and the titles, and we wrote, and we shared our writing. And the response was really positive, and I was a little stunned by it, and I thought, well, maybe there's really something here, you know. And then I would tell my coaching, I would get coached. When I train, I would sometimes get coached in front of the class by my students, and the book was a topic of coaching for many people. So that's where I kept hearing this, you really do need to write this story. So it's just started coming out. I have some of you know there's a cabin in Utah that I rent with friends of mine, and I would go up there and I would write. Actually, one of the first iterations of this was a piece that John directed, which was a piece with me and a dancer. I mean, there were 4 people. It was like a a solo, well, it wasn't a solo piece, but it was, just a piece that was some of the writing. And I just discovered in the course of it that the story just sort of started to unfold. Also with your help and with the writing group's help, to focus it in. And I got out of the period of really having to write to process, because nobody wants to read that crap. I mean, that's really worthless. So I got beyond that, and then got to actually get into the process of the artistry of the writing of it.
Yeah.
And I just sunk into it. I didn't do it consistently, which is why it took so long to do this. But when I went there, it just felt like this is what I have to do. So.
Yeah, thank you.
It's
And I
kind of
love
internal
the
thing.
artistry of the writing, because that is very evident in your memoir.
Thanks.
I think as a memoir writer, it can be sometimes very difficult because we know we're going to air some of the dirty laundry around our families and people that we really love. Was that an issue for you? I mean, as you've been said, it's a really intimate memoir. What was that like, and how did you navigate that?
I didn't tell everything.
Right.
Some of you know some things that are not in the book. And there were some other people that I figured had been dead long enough that it was okay to say whatever I wanted to say in terms of my grandparents. I only would say something if it served the book, if it served the story, if it was important for somebody to know something. Because dirty laundry, I mean, that's how Trump is where he is, It's like we don't want to be in that kind of conversation with each other. So, yeah, it's really in service of the experience of the person, the reader, that I would imagine, what their experience would be in terms of what they learned from it, what they would reflect on their own from it, what their own process was. So.
And one thing that is so true about this book, at least for me, is the deep love that you have for your parents, this deep affection. So I'm curious, in the writing of the book, did you learn more about your relationship with your parents, and if so, what was that?
In terms of Dad, and actually John helped me with this, because John was one of my early readers of the book. And at one point John said, "You got to let your dad off the hook." What do you mean I don't let my dad off the hook? And I'd read it and go, yeah, okay, I guess he's right. So there's a way that I think I found compassion for Dad. I had started finding it as we were in this negotiating our relationship with each other, but in kind of going back and then writing about it and processing it, I actually found more compassion for him. And for my mother, well, the first thing that happened was I thought of all the missed opportunities. And all the things that I said, oh yeah, we can do next year. And yeah, I'll do that, tomorrow. And then it didn't happen. And all the questions that I had about our family that I don't know. I don't have answers to. So there was some sadness around that, actually. And I think writing also helped me come more to terms with the fact that I was not with her when she died. I actually left momentarily. I had been with her almost nonstop for 2 weeks, and I was exhausted. I knew she could die in the night, and I also knew there wasn't anything else I could give her. And sure enough, I went home and slept for like 3 hours, and they called and said, "Your mom just passed." So there was still some like, I should have been there. I was there for Dad, all that stuff. So yeah.
And actually, Kim, what was also so amazing about taking this journey with you over the last 7 years was that this story was unfolding as you were writing about it, and until the moment that your mother died. And so it was really stunning to see you walk through it and also be able to find so beautifully and elegantly the language to describe what you were going through. Just
Thanks.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
One of the things that I love about the book is that it has quite a bit of background history about your family, which is actually a pretty extraordinary family, very accomplished, very interesting, kind of middle class Chicago, And there's a whole kind of background about learning about your ancestors that kind of really sort of make and bring to light, bring to relief, you and your parents. But they're not, we were thinking that there are not that many African American memoirs out there. You did, I think, some research, like going African American memoirs, and, not tons and tons of them. So the question was, was that very freeing? Like, I'm writing a memoir as an African American woman, and there's not tons of competition out there. Or was it in some way like, there's something here that I want to tell because it doesn't get told that often?
I don't think that I was concerned about getting it right because I don't know what that, didn't know what that meant. But I was concerned about how other black folks would perceive my portrayal of black folks. So not necessarily about a memoir, but kind of that old I'm not black enough shit, that started coming up, it's like, oh God. So there was some of that, and particularly around the use, I use Negro and black, I intersperse it at different parts of the book, and for the most part, Negro refers to, my father always used Negro. He hated black, and African American, I was like way out of his league. Mom would use black. But when they were growing up, the discrimination that they experienced, all of that, we were Negroes until Stokely, which was, I don't know, what was that, 64, 4, 5, something like that. So I had people are gonna wonder about, because you don't hear that term very often anymore. So it was more that kind of thing. And I'm wondering if there's more memoirs, but they're just not visible. We wouldn't know if there's more or if there aren't, because they're just not, people don't know.
Right. Well, you've just added to the canon, however big or small, that's for sure. Another piece that is really interesting about your book is this whole Christian Scientist thing, which
Most of my friends know about that one too.
Right,
Yeah.
which, is partly why your mum, by the time she got to the hospital, was in as bad a state as she was. And I wonder if you'd say a little bit about that and how that was for you as somebody who doesn't themselves practice Christian Science.
I was raised Christian Science. I stopped going to Sunday school sometime around 8th grade or something, I think. I don't even remember. And Dad had always despised it because both his mother and my mom's mom had gotten sick, had refused to go to the doctor because in my dad's case, his father had status in the church, in the Christian Science church, and it was like, my grandma said, no, I can't go to the doctor, he's got the highest position in the church. And for my mother's mother, I'm not sure, it wasn't about that, but she also refused medical care. So, and Dad said several times, this disease has taken on all the 3 most important women in my life. So, I am not a Christian Scientist. I think there are some wonderful Christians. I know a couple, but, and I think that there is something to a belief that there's a way that we can make too much emphasis on illness, and that we can make illness more real. Because I've had some mini healings. I was going to a rehearsal once. Actually, it was a performance, and I had a sinus headache for the first time in my life. I thought I was going to pass out. I was so sick, and I had to go to the show. And by just putting and throwing myself into the performance, I was fine. It was gone. So I believe that some of that stuff works, but it doesn't always work.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a mixed, I'm maybe a little ambivalence around it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but Mom was, she refused doctors. The only treatment she went to was a Christian Science, I'm not sure what it was, but kind of a health center outside of Chicago that she liked, but she didn't go back to.
Right. But then the irony of these last years of her life, where in a sense
Yes.
she was very much
Yes.
enfolded by the medical world, and your relationship was perceived a lot through that modality.
Yeah.
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 So I asked you if your relationship with your parents changed in the process of writing this book. I'm curious if your relationship with yourself changed in the process of writing this book and what that was like.
Well, I think part of it I spoke to earlier in terms of the compassion that I started developing for my father. I mean, that gave me more of a compassionate sense in general. But I actually think the biggest change for me was actually saying I'm a writer. Because I never said that. I've written theater stuff, I've done solo work, I've done, but I would never say, oh, I'm not a writer, you know, Bob's a writer, you know, I mean, you know, other people I know are writers, I'm not, you know, I'm not a writer. And I can say now that I am. And
you are.
there was a claiming of that wasn't possible until I did this.
Right. And can I tell on you a little bit here? So
Can I stop you?
No. So Kim would turn up to writing circles
Jesus.
and just read something so breathtakingly beautiful. You'd hear down that it's done on a teleconference line. You just hear people go, you know, just like we heard tonight from the audience as she was reading like this, and then we would hear you say, but oh no, I'm not a writer, and we'd all be going, then who the hell is a writer, right? So yeah, you are a writer and you are an author. Yeah. Just a couple more questions, and then I'm sure you will have questions you want to ask him. One of them being, do you feel that you have any wisdom to share with people who might be in a position now of being with a parent or a loved one who is showing signs of dementia? Is that something that could you speak to that a little?
Just like voting in Chicago, have conversations early and often. As early as possible. And as often, because it can take a while for people that are in that older generation, and particularly when the partnership is still there, you know, and if one of them is going through dementia and the other isn't, that can be really really difficult. So, you know, find your entry points. Be patient. Be patient and be persistent. And find support. Find people to lean into. Talk to people. Cry with people. So many times, I have a friend now who's going through a hard time, whose partner has been really ill and has a hard time just really leaning in sometimes with people. It's like, lean in. People actually want to be there for us. So, you know, just take advantage of that and really believe that. That goes for, I guess, for any time we're in anything that's really so difficult. You know, just.
And that kind of leads nicely into my last question for you, which is, do you believe that all will be well?
Mom? I believe all eventually will be well. I don't always in the moment.
Think that's what it's called.
I don't always in the moment really believe all will be well. And yet, yes, there is a part of me that believes that. And part of that is that Christian Science. I mean, there's that sort of a tenet that's still in there, and it's definitely, certainly from her. Yeah, I do.
Thank
It looks
you.
messy sometimes, but
Yes.
you know.
It doesn't always look pretty.
No. So,
Before we open it up to questions from your many friends out there, would you sing one more song? End with,
if I can have help from my threshold buddies.
yeah, you are not alone.
Come on. Come up here. Now. Oh, it's short. You know it. So, the Threshold Choir. Oh my God! There's so many of us. All right, let's see. How should we do this? I don't know. Okay. So, my choir sisters came to sing for my mom every day in some grouping. Jacqueline would sometimes come on her own every day until she died. And The woman who started the choir, her name is Kate Munger, and the choir is international. It started in Catherine Osborne's house, like, what was it, 13 years ago, something like that? I don't even remember. Longer, 16 years ago. Well, I wasn't around, I can't remember. So, anyway, Kate wrote a song for my mom. You Were Not Alone. You are not alone. I am here beside you. You are not alone. I am here now. You are not alone. I am here beside you. You are not alone. I am here now. Sure, if anybody's got a question. I got a question? Oh, Mickey.
Yeah, I was struck as you were reading all the voices I heard. Like, so it's in the writing, but it's also in your reading. You know, there's you, there's your mother and your father, and your inflection brings them all forward. And I was caught by, as we get older, as we grow, we're frustrated with our parents because they don't see us as adults. And we're grieving that at that time. And then we have this opportunity like this, and we know without their letting us know they see us as an adult, we really are, because we're filling that role. But at the same time, I heard you as a child again, and it was an opportunity to be a child with her again. Is that true?
Oh,
I just
interesting. Well, probably at some moments, like when we were singing, or just even sitting and sort of neutrally admiring the woods and the waters and the, over by the lake. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, possibly then. I think so much I was in caregiving mode that it was kind of hard to really access that, because I was always having to make a decision about something, just about every day. So, but yeah, in sort of the spaces in between, yeah, maybe. I think I might write about that. Diane and then Renee.
Your writing is just so glorious.
Thank you.
It's just beautiful. And I'm struck with how time feels like a character. In the sense, also just the length of from when your mom had a stroke to her passing. So can you talk about how like the influence of time and the impact of, or the influence of time in the writing? Like you say, it took 7 years, but I can imagine that's what needed to happen.
Well, yeah, part of the reason that it took so long was that I realized at one point that I couldn't finish this until after Mom died. Mm-hmm. I really needed the distance from that experience of her death, as well as the experience of the past 12 years. So time did play a real important role there, and I had to have time to really reflect and look back and see, is that really what I want to say? Is that what's really important here? And time, it's interesting, when you said that, the thing that actually came to my mind was how time made a difference when she had the stroke. Because she had the stroke, she and Dad had separated, so she was, they had been at a party, she was home, he usually would call her in the evening, he couldn't reach her. So he walked over to her house and found her on the floor babbling. And who knows how long she was there. And then he said, what do you want me to do? And this is what he told me. And she said, do what you think is best. Well, what he thought was best was waiting until the doctor that he knew, which was a white doctor from the University of Chicago who had done neurological work on him, would be available for surgery, which meant that there were added hours that her brain was bleeding. So, that's the part about Dad I still haven't quite resolved. I understand what he did, but yeah. Anyway, because there's within one chapter there can also be different times. It can cover different periods of time. So, yeah, I hadn't thought of it as a character, but certainly it is an important mover, an element that moves the book. Yeah. Thanks.
You mentioned hi. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you.
And Sue Schleifer says hello.
Oh.
So anyway, you mentioned having conversations early. What kind of conversations?
Well, these weren't early. My mother, I had them early with. I knew a lot about, I knew something about her financial situation. I mean, hers and Dad's were tied, but I knew a little bit about hers because I was on her account. So I at least knew that much. I had some sense of how she wanted to deal with her body, although I didn't do what she said she wanted done. But Dad, there was nothing. There was nothing. There hadn't been any wills. There was no. I'm losing all of my financial terms now. But anyway, nothing had been set in place, so that when he's gone, I wouldn't have known what to do. So I really had to push him to say, we have got to do this, because clearly he said several times, I will take care of her until I drop. Well, I don't want you to drop and then there be, I have to figure out all this financial stuff. So the more you can start having the structures set up so that as the kid, you don't have to figure all that stuff out on your own. So, as well as just how they want to, as much as they would be willing to engage in the conversation, what do they want around their death? How do they feel about their death? When my dad was dying, I said something to him. I said, I see you driving down. He loved to drive. He had like 6 cars, they were all big honking cars, and he loved to drive. And I said, I see you driving down Texas at night. Just you on the road and stars and a big black shiny Cadillac. He said, yeah, Texas Panhandle. So I wanted to scatter his ashes there, but I haven't been able to make it to the Texas Panhandle, so they're in Marin. So, thanks. Thank you so much for being here.